I want to ask you, I want to invite you to think about change. I want to ask you to think about change, perhaps in a slightly deeper sense than the way we usually think about it. There's an English religious song which says, I was going to sing it to you, but I won't. It says, "Change and decay in all around I see. O thou who changest not, abide with me." That gives a pretty negative view of change. Change and decay. I'm a grumpy old man, I am. I'm old enough to be grumpy. And so to me, change brings with it tremendous threats. Change and decay and all around I see. But on the other hand, if you look at Confucius, Confucius will say that to be happy and content, we have continuously to accept change. How do we reconcile those two opposite views? Perhaps I could give a comment of Winston Churchill. He actually produced what you might call the middle way. Winston Churchill once said, "There's nothing wrong with change, provided it's in the right direction." Now the whole point is this, and this is what I want you to think about. The whole point is, what is the right direction? We see so many changes in Bhutan. I've had the privilege of first living in Bhutan 43 years ago, when in so many ways it was a different country. Or was it? This is what I really want you to think about. We see so many changes around us, but how deep are they? We see so many changes around us. I meet many visitors here who will say, "Oh my goodness, how terrible to see how Thimphu has changed. How terrible to think of Bhutan changing." So many tourists who come here, they come here wanting to see a museum. They come here precisely because Bhutan, they think, has not changed. And then when they discover Bhutan has changed, and there are even slight reminiscences of New York in Thimphu High Street, they are very disappointed. They don't want to see change. That's their perception. But what about a Bhutanese? When I first lived in Bhutan, the death rate of children in their first year of birth was over 60%. 6 out of every 10 children born died in their first year of birth. What do you think is the perception of those mothers with the changes now brought about by healthcare, etc., which mean their children live rather than die? The tourist versus the mother. What about the person who years ago would have had to travel for days and days by foot through the mountains to get from A to B? Today can get from A to B in a few hours. The tourist will say, "Oh, what a pity, so many cars." When I first lived here in Bhutan, there were 470, there were 47 vehicles in the whole country. I believe today there are approximately 47,000. And everybody will say, "How terrible, all this pollution and all this sort of thing." Okay, great. Instead of going from Thimphu to Paro to catch your aeroplane, all you visitors, walk back, as people used to do, and then ask me what you think of change. So, I need to get on with my slides. I put a few slides together, which I hope will show Bhutan as it was 43 years ago when I first lived here, and one or two of the changes. Can we see if the technology works? One of the most significant changes, Bhutan, when I came here in 1971, was a secret, isolated Himalayan kingdom, rather like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. Nobody came in and nobody went out. It was totally secret. It had no connections with the outside world. And then the third king, in his great wisdom, decided that if nobody had ever heard of Bhutan, nobody would miss Bhutan. If Bhutan were taken over by some other power, then everybody would say, "Oh, big deal, where's Bhutan?" So he worked very hard to arrive at the situation you see in this picture, which I am sure you will recognize as being the announcement by the Secretary General of the United Nations to say that Bhutan in 1971 became a member of the UN. I would like you to look in a moment at the next photo and just think about the difference between that scene in New York for Bhutan joining the UN and the next photo, which shows the scene in Thimphu for the joining of the UN. And you see very much what a contrasting culture there was. This was the 3-day archery match, which celebrated Bhutan entering into the Comity of Nations. One result of that, of course, was a whole plethora of changes which are still going on today. And I just wish that sometimes these big change agents, like the UN, like donor agencies, like some of us who come here saying, oh, this should change, that should change, I just wish we would think sometimes a little more deeply about what change means, not to us only, but to ordinary people too who will be affected by these change. But one of them I mentioned. You don't have to walk back to Paro today, because in the next picture you will see the beginnings of what life was like. In 1971, I visited Punakha for the first time, and this was the road from Lobesa to Punakha. Now, anybody travels along that road today knows it's all hard top, and you can travel along at 40 kilometres, 50 kilometres now with no problem. That's what it was like. What have we got today? We have got superhighways, a vast number of motor cars. Is that a good change or a bad change? We can so easily come up with a superficial opinion, but it needs a great deal of thought given to it. And we need to understand that one man's meat is another man's poison. Your ease of getting to the airport to catch your plane implies pollution. Just as one example. The next picture. Instead of travelling around by horse up in the mountains and pony, now people have got BMWs. And the transition, I think, has had a whole lot of implications. I ask myself, actually, with great respect to anybody who does have a BMW, and I'm sure you must all have BMWs, why do you need a BMW? You know, a member of the National Assembly the other day said, gosh, do you expect us to go around in Maruti Altos? And my answer is, yes, I do. However, there's a BMW. Now, this is a picture which will be familiar, I hope, to everybody here, because this is bang in the middle of Thimphu, and it exemplifies another change too. The building on the left is the cinema hall in Thimphu, and you'll see that it was all really rather pleasant. That building was one of the biggest buildings in the whole of Thimphu, and in front were cherry blossom trees and one motor car. The next picture shows the same building today. It's in the back there. It's dwarfed by all the giant buildings around it, and of course it is in the middle of a sea of car parking. Good change or not good change? Next picture. Paro, where those who visiting Bhutan, where you landed. Paro in 1971. Peaceful, gentle, quiet. 6 out of every 10 children born died in their first year of birth. Paro today. Many houses, and now this most significant thing of all, communication with the outside world. Communication is two ways. It's not just Bhutanese going out to see the outside world, as one of our speakers today was talking about. It is people coming from the outside into Bhutan, bringing with them, like viruses, microbes, or dust on their clothes, bringing with them outside influences, which inevitably will create a change in the people's minds of Bhutan. But, of course, is it a good thing to be able to go out, to see outside your country? Is it a good thing to have strangers coming into your country with new ideas? Both produce changes. What are those changes? How deep are they? How do they manifest themselves? And I shall want to go on to say that I don't want to talk about changes big and small. I want to talk about changes visible and invisible. And it is often that which cannot be seen by the eye which is the most important. You may well have read that lovely little book by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the French author, called The Little Prince, where in that book the fox explains to the little prince that what is most important is that which cannot be seen by the eye. Is that true of change? Are we too misled by seeing the physical manifestations of change here in Bhutan? The aeroplane, the next picture, the satellite dish, this invisible communication that goes through radio waves, through the air, where through that dish I have access to almost all the knowledge in the world. I can access Stanford Library. I can see instant, real-time pictures of what is happening in Australia or in America or in Europe. The influence of what comes up and down through that dish, although I should add this is a slight deception. That's old-fashioned now. Now it all goes through fibre optic cable, but they don't make as good a photograph. So if we think of the implications of that satellite dish, what's coming in and what's going out? Let's move on. This is a well-known photo of Bill Gates's toilet. One result is that young people in Bhutan, and old people and monks, are now well into all these modern communications technologies. You can go to a religious ceremony in a monastery and there are all the monks chanting their prayers and you hear a bing bong 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 noise of a mobile phone. You talk to any school kid in Bhutan, even in a remote village where there is internet, will be on Facebook. I forget the exact figure, but I think there are 30 or 40,000 people on Facebook in Bhutan now. And think of the communication that that involves and the changes that that can make. It can have some very, very, very good effects. But also, I'm told, because I don't do social media, I am told that it can be very dangerous as well. So let's just think about these changes. One change, this was very interesting, you know. Half the Olympic Games in London took place horizontally. So I apologize for this photograph, but if you're able to imagine, if you can rotate it, you'll see Bhutanese athletes at the last Olympic Games in London, unthinkable in 1971. Let's move on. Don't worry about turning it the right way up. Everybody knows what the rings are. Right, this was Paro in 1971. Open fields, not many houses. Look at the building that's got on. In the next photo, we see some little houses there, which were in the centre of Paro. In 71, all the little houses were like this wooden building in the forefront. Now, let's go on. Houses in Thimphu High Street in 1971. A typical old Bhutanese house. But beside that house, we find, the next picture, this sort of thing. And the next picture, we need to be stylish. We need to have great sheets of plate glass. Even in a country prone to earthquake. I wouldn't want to be standing outside there in an earthquake, would you? But I don't want to give you a view. I'm simply showing these pictures for you to think about change. Next picture, I have to rush. Now, these great mountain people who were used to striding up tens of thousands of feet up the mountains now need escalators to take them from one floor to another. Let's move on. This was the Olatang Hotel in Paro, where you may have stayed in 1971. That's where I stayed my first night. Now we have hotels like the one we're in now. And, of course, all this generates a great deal for a very brilliant young initiative in Bhutan to deal with rubbish. But if the rubbish were not there, there would not have been the opportunity for young people to show entrepreneurship. So good and bad. Two sides of the coin. Paro in 1971. Let's move on again. Look at these children. Happiness. Next picture. You have to turn sideways again. Think about those kids and all the modern influences they're experiencing. Some change. Here we have a great castle, which is now like this. What has actually changed? Is it just the fabric of the building? Or have there been any changes in the hearts and the minds of the people? For 200 years, the main aim of the rulers of Bhutan was to keep the wicked British out. And so one enormous change, which is symbolic of a diplomatic entry into the outside world, is the fact that now there is a representative of Britain here in Thimphu. Remember, for over 200 years, it was the main aim to keep them out. Here we are. And now, of course, we have this great constant of religion, and we have to ask ourselves, what sort of changes will we experience in the religious aspect in the next few years? Well, I come back to these kids. I'm sorry it's sideways, because I see this as a very significant photo. And what I'd like to do is to go back to the first photo. The first photo, and being an old man, I've no confidence in technology. And so, in case you can't get it, I brought my own. Now, what I want you to think about is this. All these visible changes that we see in Bhutan, all these visible changes that we talk about as we drive down the road through Babessa, great buildings everywhere, television, internet, Facebook, etc., etc. If you look at that mask, we've got the outward form of the mask, but look at those little eyes inside that mask. Ask ourselves, the modern visible changes, to what extent and in what ways has the mind behind those real little eyes actually changed?